Hi, everybody. Very excited today because I'm going to be presenting a conversation between Ken Ammi and Jeff Williams. And Ken is a Christian and Jeff is an atheist. And we're going to talk about a topic that is pretty near and dear to my heart. Is atheism dead? Oh, shoot. Now I hear hold on. Heard my conversation going in a different tune there. Okay, so we're going to talk about that, and I'm pretty excited about that. So without further ado, first I'm going to ask Ken to introduce himself, then Jeff to introduce himself, maybe share a little bit about how they came to the beliefs they have. And then what we'll do is we'll define the topics. What exactly is atheism, and what would it mean if atheism is dead? And so let's go with Ken.
Well, allow myself to introduce myself. Good morning, everybody. I'm pleased to be joined by SJ and Jeffrey. Or I guess we're joining her since she's hosting us, for which I'm appreciative. So I'm a Messianic Jew, having come from a Jewish background, attended Jewish private school, bar mitzvah in Israel, all that good stuff. There was a period in my life, most of it early ages, that I would have considered myself an agnostic, although I'm not exactly sure I understood what that meant, but it seemed like what I was back then. And well, eventually came to recognize Jesus as the Messiah. And so that's why, if I'm introduced as a Christian, that's perfectly fine with me, because it's kind of like atheism. Part of what SJ mentioned is the different terms people or definitions people have of it. Well, it's the same with Messianic Jew, Jewish Christian, followers of the way. And I don't know, ever since I've kind of been interested in theological and worldview related issues. I've published a great number of books on various topics relating to all of that stuff, including how they interact with culture. And I don't know, I just enjoy these kind of discussions. And even just before starting, we discussed that this is more of a discussion, not like any kind of formal debate. So we'll just have a nice little chat.
Great. Well, thank you. And so let's go over to Jeff.
For those who know me already, they know I'm just a simple semi-literate biker, ride a CBR. I live under a bridge in Carmel, Indiana. And I grew up in a very religious Lutheran family. My mother's family is from Norway, and her parents' generation was still very, very religious. And so I was brought up a Lutheran. I believed fervently until I got to college. And basically, University of Chicago is part of my philosophy program. I also took courses in the divinity school. I took comparative literature and history of ancient Near Eastern religions with Martin Marty, who ironically had been the Lutheran pastor who confirmed me. And those two courses turned me into an atheist. Going forward today, I don't particularly, maybe on Twitter it seems that way, but I'm far more interested in philosophy and its intersection with quantum physics than I am with the question of God. For me, that question was solved decades ago. So it's not something I actively think about. I'm certain there's no God. A funny thing happened with my mother, who was the one who pushed me into religion. She made sure that my religious upbringing was strong. And she later became an atheist after I did, but she became an atheist later in life. One of the weird things about that is there were a number of years there where she continued to go to church. And if somebody were to ask her, what's your religion, she would say Lutheran, even though she did not believe it. And it turns out, and we'll talk about this later with a study that David Vos did, that just quite a bit of that. But I've I went from extremely religious to it's no longer a question for me. Um, Today, though, I mean, we'll talk about is atheism dead? I think all objective evidence points to just the contrary, but it's a discussion we'll have. As Ken had indicated for himself, I always prefer respectful discussion to formal debate, and I think that's a good way for us to proceed today. Um, if I seem groggy, it's because I just woke up. I'm nocturnal. I don't usually get up till 1, so I'm groggy.
Jeff needs some coffee.
I have some right here.
Oh,
I
that's
feel the
good.
same way.
That's good. Well, good. So let me just go ahead and we'll start the conversation. So if maybe just Ken, if you want to talk a few minutes about why you think atheism is dead, and I know Jeff sent me some slides, and so he'll be talking a few minutes about why he thinks it's not dead, and so and then maybe you guys can have a back and forth question and answer if you'd like to do it that way.
Sure. In fact, let's start where we said we would, which is actually defining terms, right? Before we get into that. Because for one, I found it fascinating. I've told so many people that when it comes to atheism, the issue of God's existence is secondary at best. And Jeffrey just stated that outright, essentially. So it's that's like a non-issue almost. It's down the line. So when we talk about atheism, well, as a word, I mean, it's like any other word. It has a long history. And when it comes to linguistics, there's a difference between a word's meanings, plural, or definitions versus usages. Those can be very, very different things. So, for example, if you take us back 2 millennia, Christians are being referred to as atheists, even though they believed in God. But it's because they denied the pantheons. They denied the Roman and Greek gods. Right. So obviously, you're not going to put that definition in today's usage of that word, right? It's a whole different context. So then we look back to the late 1800s when one of the Huxleys coined the term agnosticism, because he said, well, on one hand, on one extreme, you have the theists positively affirming God's existence, where you have the atheists positively affirming God's non-existence. And he thought, well, I can't go to either one of those extremes, so I want a middle position, and he coined that term, right? So at least in the late 1800s, it was widely understood that that is the atheist position. It's a positive affirmation of God's non-existence. But then, of course, atheists kept being asked for their proof. And since they don't have any, they opted for a watered-down fallback position, which, I mean, at least in pop culture, they would say something like, well, I just lack a belief in God. Just something nice and generic, right? It's not typically, I should say, I still run into tons of atheists of the positive affirmation of God's non-existence denomination. Sure, all the time. But there's also the other denomination. And in academia, that some of the terms that are used would be like weak atheism versus strong atheism. There's various terms that they use to distinguish 2 main denominations. And so, yeah, that's one thing that's important to get up front whenever you're in a discussion with an atheist, is which one of those they adhere to. And with any discussion about anything, it is always good to define terms ahead. It should be obvious, but it doesn't happen that much. So I would say, I mean, obviously we're speaking anthropomorphically when we say atheism. That goes without saying, but I said it. And it's mostly because it fails before it even begins, right? Atheism is a worldview, and it carries baggage along with it. It has to, just like any other worldview, just like any other philosophy, just like anything else that forms a core of a worldview, which then branches out and touches everything, informs the holder of that worldview of how to understand all the other things that form that worldview, right? So atheism spreads out its tentacles from a core, and it corrupts everything that it touches. And so now, regardless of what the atheist thinks about they have to maintain that dogmatheism, right? That core dogma. They have to adhere to it in order to remain loyal atheists, obviously, because if not, then they will no longer be atheists. So if for whatever reason they have an interest in maintaining their atheism, then it doesn't matter what they're thinking about or how they're thinking. It doesn't matter what they think about. They will have to think about it within certain parameters. And that's why atheism is thought restricting. You must maintain that central dogma regardless. And now hopefully somebody will actually be interested enough in the truth to step beyond that. If they are, for whatever odd reason, an atheist would be interested in that. But in order to be a faithful atheist, pardon the pun, they have to restrict their thinking to these parameters that are laid out by atheism, which generally could be, I don't know, referred to as materialistic or naturalistic, and all the baggage that comes along with it, because they have to maintain a certain view of anthropology, a certain view of cosmology, and that's pretty much everything else just comes with. So that's part of why it's dead and it fails before it even begins, because by definition, it would begin with an existence that it was not created, was not designed, was not the end result of a goal or a plan, a volitional concept, which implies that everything, the universe and all it contains by definition, so humanity, just happens to have happened the way it happened, all by itself, accidentally. And so, well, everything that follows from that in terms of human epistemology is really just subjectivism. Because the universe is accidental, therefore reality is accidental, therefore truth is accidental, therefore facts are accidental, and there's no universal imperative to adhere to any of it. You can, as a personal preference that's subjective, based on hidden assumptions, sure you can, but that's just the point. That would be subjective. If an accidentally and temporarily existing ape does not want to adhere to reality, truth, facts, then there's no universal imperative for them to do so, nor any premise upon which to condemn them for not doing so. So there you go. It's all subjectivism, up and down and all around. I think that might be enough to kind of get us going.
Okay, so let me just follow up on that really quickly. So, would you say the central dogma, that's a question coming from Nikki, of atheism is that God does not exist and then everything comes from that? Or what would you say is the central dogma? I don't know. We can go to Jeff if he wants to pick up on that too.
I mean, it depends on whether we want to go top down or bottom up. Central dogma would be that the universe and all it contains, therefore reality, truth, and facts, and humans are just, we're not meant to be. We're accidentally existing beings. So anything else must follow from that basic concept.
Okay, what do you say, Jeff?
Well, there's a lot on the philosophy side there I obviously disagree with, and I see it from both sides because I once thought that way. I want to start out with just the demographics of atheism, so we can see, is it really dead or is it growing, and then address the philosophical questions. But just real quickly, I want to say that I deny there is such a thing as atheistic dogma or an atheistic worldview. I don't have a worldview. That's a metaphysical construction that I reject, and we'll talk about that in depth. But if atheism were dead, we would see it in a moribund state, where instead we see it growing almost exponentially. Could you put up graphic A?
Yes, hold on one second. Let me just get that here.
I would do this, but I
screen.
haven't the slightest idea how. I'm allergic to technology. I can barely put a video together.
Yeah, I have just, I put them all in my downloads. Let me just find those graphics.
It's okay,
really
we're not
quickly.
in a hurry.
Okay, so
And I'm
there
still
they
waking
are.
up.
I originally had coffee with me, but I opted for water because I knew if I kept drinking coffee as we talked, it would just
Uh-oh,
I'd be
that's
like
not the
talking
one.
way too fast and sweating way too much.
That isn't A.
Oh, that's not A? Okay, sorry. Maybe I'm going the opposite direction. Then I'll start with the last one that I put in. Maybe it says what it's. All right, stop sharing and start sharing. Hold on just one second. I have another slide. Share screen. Is this the one?
Yes. And I just
Okay.
wanted one this is from the Decline of Christianity in the Western World. And down there it says the Pew Research Center projects, and this is from 2020, it projects that Christians will make up less than half of the American population by 2070, with estimated target ranges that you're falling between 35 and 46% of the American population, down from 64% in 2022 and 91% in 1976. So as far as Christianity goes, which in the United States is predominantly theist, it's a predominant theistic belief. It's very much on the decline, almost moribund. Interestingly enough, on Die Deutsche Welle, they just showed a recent survey in Germany where Christianity has become a minority for the first time. It's at 48%. Can we go to B?
Okay. And let me ask you this.
Mhm.
Let me be sure I'm on here so you can hear me. Okay, you can hear me. Let me just ask you this. I've got my friend Nikki. She just wants to say before we start this, she wants to know your definite, like, how do you define atheism? If you looked it up in a dictionary, what's your definition?
I don't get my definitions from dictionaries. But for me, I take the word literally. It's without theism.
Okay, so
Anybody who does not believe in a God is an atheist. That's my definition. That was the original definition, and there's no reason to change it in any way.
okay. So a person who does not believe in God is an atheist.
Yes.
Okay,
There's
let's
all
see.
sorts of degrees of disbelief, but if you don't believe in a God, you are without a theism, without a theistic belief.
Okay, can you see the slide here?
Barely,
Hopefully.
barely. But as you can see, I'm going to talk about a guy named David Vos in just a minute, but I just want to go over the percent of atheists in certain countries. Now, this is the Wynne Gallup survey, and they used my definition of atheism. Anybody who does not profess a belief in a God is, actually, it's worse than that. It's people who don't believe in a God. And you can see it's not just the Western phenomenon. Japan is very, very high, 86. You have Sweden, Czech Republic, United Kingdom, all of these, Belgium, Estonia, Denmark, and Norway, Hong Kong, South Korea, Canada, Spain. United States is further down, and we can skip C. I just wanted that just to show where United States is. United States is still much higher. It's about 60% believe yet in God. But we'll look at the trend. But what we see there are the most modernistic, in Vos's terms, the most modern countries, and by that we mean the highest educated, the highest standard of living, the wealthiest, and the freest, the highest, for the most part, freest, are the most atheistic. The least modern are still predominantly theistic. Can we go to the next one, whichever that is? D. Can we go to D? No, let's see.
Sorry, I realize I'm chatting and I'm not even I'm
Yeah,
chatting
I'm not in a
without the
hurry.
thing turned on. So
I'm
hold on, I've got it. It's a little klutzy the way I've got this in my computer, unfortunately.
Well, it's
Okay,
much
here you go.
better than I would do. This is a slide. Let me talk about the next three. The next three graphics are from a guy named David Voas, Voas. He's probably the leading expert on the numbers concerning religiosity in the world. He's a quantitative social scientist. He's on the executive committee of the European Values Studies, co-director of British Religion in Numbers, on the editorial board of the British Journal of Sociology and the editorial board of Scientific Study of Religion. His whole business, is the numbers behind religiosity and the trends. And he before we get, he had a couple of conclusions he drew. First is you have to be raised with religion to find religion natural. That doesn't mean that there aren't people who are raised without religion who don't at some point become religious, although that's certainly bucking against the tide. But to find it natural, you need to be raised with it. And the example he gives is for Christians looking at Hinduism and their gods and their rites and things like that. And it seems very, very strange. And you wouldn't normally be attracted to converting to Hinduism. And people who aren't raised with Christianity see Christianity as just as bizarre. Because they weren't, if you're not raised in that religion, it just seems strange. Just like all the other religions you weren't raised in seem strange. Okay, religious belief and practice are not inherently odd, but contemporary culture is not conducive to religious revival. And he says that for several reasons. First of all, is we've hit a tipping point. In the next couple of graphs, I'll explain that tipping point a little further. But second is within a modern culture, the need for religion lessens, and it becomes more questionable. The more scientifically literate we become, the less religion explains. Um, and we have reached the tipping point where in modern cultures, it's extremely unlikely that there's going to be a revival. There's not going to be another great awakening. And in other countries, as they modernize, they will probably follow that same trend. Can we go to the next one?
Yes, I should say. Okay, here we go. Share screen. Window. And that's the one with New Zealand, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Is there a way to get that band out? I see a band underneath, probably the most important part on there.
Oh, let's see that. Does that work? Oh, look, there's my. It won't let me. It won't let me do that. It's unfortunate. Yeah. I can
it
try
is.
to, maybe if I can get this bigger. Hold on.
If you
Oh, there we go.
There you go. What this is this isn't a trend over time. Okay. It's something much more significant. It's the religious affiliation today by year of birth. And you see those few people left from 1900, or those who, he went back. What he did is he took a mound of census data and statistically valid surveys and compiled this so that he could look at, for people in 1900, what percent of them had a religious affiliation, For me, like I was born in 1952, so for my cohort, it would be like about 84%, something like that, had a religious affiliation. People born in 1990, it's about 37% have a religious affiliation. Now, what happens is the more that people don't have a religious affiliation, the more they don't raise their children in a religion. And that's what happened with me. Neither of my kids were raised in a religion, and the chances of them ever converting to a religion are extremely small, because of the strangeness of it. Not to say it doesn't happen. There are people who take up a religion, but they are far fewer than those who remove themselves from religion. If you look at the cohort of from 1952, it says 84 today believe are religious. I'm certain that when I was a kid, that 84 was in the 90s, which means people left. And their kids left even more, and their kids left even more until you get to 1990. And when you look at the Generation Zs, the religion is a pretty small minority. Can we go to the next one? It's my last of the graphics.
I think that might be the last one I have for some
Okay,
reason.
that's fine. The other one just showed the same trend in the United States. And what you would see is that we started later, but we're on that same curve. And we are now with the Gen Z. Religious people are in a minority. We are at that generation. We are already majority atheist. And one of the things that David Vos, had shown was that those numbers don't change drastically as you get older. If anything, the religiosity goes down, not up, as time goes on. People deconvert at a much faster rate than people convert. So just, yes.
Let me just ask you something really quickly, because I think it's really important we clarify this.
Mm-hmm.
There is a little bit of a conflation here between people who don't identify with a religion and saying that they're atheists, because there's a lot of religious nuns, like people like my dad, who doesn't identify with the church, but he believes in God, but he would not be called an atheist. He'd be called a nun. And so I think that graph that you have might be showing the nuns, the agnostics, and the...
No, the nuns are off to the side. It did show the nuns, if you want to put it. Oh, those last three. Yeah, the Vos ones. Absolutely, that's right. He put the nuns in there. And I readily take that point, but I don't think it's that significant, because it's just a further step away from religion. It's part of the overall trend. And as that weakens, it weakens in the children, and you get the Gen Z, where it's a minority who have any religious affiliation or at all. And it's the trend that matters. Where you are at the moment on that trend is less important than where that trend is heading. And not only is it heading toward atheism, but it's picky. The speed of that deconversion or lack of religion is accelerating. So I just objectively, we might now, I from what Ken started with, we may have a philosophical discussion about it, but as a matter of demographics, atheism is very much in the ascendance and religion is very much on the decline.
So let's let Ken talk about what he thinks about that. I did want to clarify just one thing. In the United States, just to throw some numbers out there, from the same polls that you're looking at, atheists right now, it did go up from about 1.5% to about 3%, agnostics 4%, and then you have a big portion of people who call themselves nuns. And so we definitely have seen a rise in the nuns, and to your points, in these developed countries, especially in places where you see more social security nets, social safety nets, welfare programs, a lot of government handouts, and also where you see less suffering. It's really interesting how that correlates, because if you look at places like China and Africa, we're seeing increases in religion and beliefs. And so that's all I'm going to say.
Right. Can I just remark on that? you put a lot of emphasis on the socialism, which I think is an overemphasis because, I mean, yeah, economic security is a key. And those countries tend to have higher standards of living, higher GDP per capita, especially Norway, which is number one in the world, and more freedom. It's not government handouts that turn people atheistic. It's freedom, economic security, and level of education, which are what he defined as modernism, that seem to be co-determinants, not government handouts.
I'm going to let Ken pick this up.
I was going to let you continue. I'll just sit back and listen. So, okay, yes. A lot to unpack there and some interesting statistics. I'm glad you showed the chart for the visuals because I'm definitely visual. So now I'm going to try to remember to not speak generically of theism because that's just painting with a broad brush broom. I'll just talk about Christianity. So that it's in decline. I say amen. That's a fulfillment of biblical prophecy. And there's a reason why the Bible refers to a remnant of believers. So we're watching it being fulfilled right in front of our very eyes. Now, one thing I think is crucial in everything you've been saying is that there's a reason why sociologists study those things. These studies and meta studies is because it has to be understood why is it that people are switching teams in one direction or whichever direction they might go. So that's actually something very, very important. So for example, the third point in one of your slides was something that current culture isn't conducive to a religious revival, words to that effect, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, well, yeah, exactly. The culture is very inviting of every kind of vice and unethical behavior. And so, of course, people who want to engage in that will, by definition, reject Christianity. Yeah. So, I mean, those are the things that are important to keep in mind is the current parochial cultural context. Now, as for atheism not being a worldview, I mean, if you want to disagree with Richard Dawkins, that's fine with me. I do it all the time.
No, I do too.
Yeah, but that you don't have a worldview by definition can't be the case because you have a view of the world. Unless you're claiming extreme absolute nihilism, which you can't even claim because then you would be making a claim. So whatever your worldview is, you definitely have, whether you want to categorize it as atheistic or not.
But could we stick on that point for a second? Because I don't want to lose it. A little bit of background. I've developed my own thinking over the decades, but my starting point very definitely is Martin Heidegger. And in his introduction to metaphysics, he goes on in detail about worldview, Weltanschauung, and how it is an artifact of metaphysical thinking, which he rejects. And he and Wittgenstein, from two different directions, shot metaphysics and killed it. A worldview is a rational schema of how the world works based on metaphysical assumptions. I don't have that. I question things. I have a lot more questions than answers. I don't believe in a systematic view of reality because reality doesn't exist as a system. It's another metaphysical artifact. I don't have a worldview. I have experience.
Hold on.
Yeah.
Just pause a second. Just because for half of that statement you were breaking up, at least for me. So no, just the last half of it, where it was that worldview is a construct.
Yeah, it's a rational systematization of a representation of reality metaphysically based. I don't have that. I don't. I have experiences, and I go into those experiences, but I don't put them, I don't see the world as a rational construct, and I reject, to the degree possible, metaphysical presuppositions. I don't. If you ask me, okay, what's your worldview? I have to say, I don't have one. I don't know.
I think it's actually just a lot simpler than that. Because if you hear in the news that we just discovered a new planet somewhere out there that's could be friendly to life, whatever, there's a way that you start thinking about it. And the way you start thinking about it is by definition guided by the core of your worldview or your
No, it isn't.
fundamental
I
level.
just absolutely reject that. That's a statement you're making. I don't see a ground for that statement, and I reject it.
Because
Wait,
you don't
so let's let Ken finish the points, and then
Okay.
and then we'll come back.
Well, okay, yeah. Okay, fair enough. Let's move on from there, and maybe we can circle back. But I'm afraid that the whole statement you opened with there with the chart and everything, I'm afraid that they're irrelevant, and this is why. Because what I was addressing is whether atheism is dead or not whether atheists were numerous or not. And there's a fundamental level distinction, because I was defining atheism as a worldview, as, let's say, a philosophy, as a word, as a concept, and that it carries baggage and all that, those things that I said about it. So that I'll give you an example. So atheists would consider that Christianity is dead, but they admit that there's a lot of Christians, right? So on that view, there could be a whole bunch of people, millions and billions, that believe in something, and that thing could be incorrect or just not true. So that's all that is irrelevant. No one's questioning whether there are atheists, human beings who are atheists. The issue is whether what they're asserting are the facts about reality are accurate or not. So atheists are alive and well. Atheism is dead as a doornail. That's the point. It's a completely different issue.
Can we clarify? Before we move on to another point, let's stick with this one for a second, because I think you're somewhat in denial, but also somewhat obscuring the term. First of all, I don't say Christianity is dead. It appears moribund to me, but it's not dead yet. But you cannot separate atheism from atheists. And as long as there are atheists, atheism isn't dead. And the denial part is, it's the atheism that is growing, which would seem, to grow, you need to be alive. And it is Christianity that is quickly shrinking, which leads to the appearance of it being moribund. So I just want to be clear that you're not saying atheism is not in ascendance, because it quite clearly is. Do we agree on that?
Right. I'm saying that we need to have a categorical distinction between atheism as a concept and atheists as human beings who hold to that concept.
How do you do that?
Well, just in that exact way.
No, you don't. Those were just words. How do you have an
I can't
atheism without
express
an
it
atheist?
without words. So my example was an atheist would say that Christianity as a concept is dead because there is no God, and Christianity is premised upon
No,
God.
it's not what I say.
Or wait, Jeff, you have to let him finish, because he gave you pretty uninterrupted time. So I just got to make sure.
So an atheist would have to affirm that Christianity is not a valid worldview. They have no premise upon which to do so, as I already reviewed, but they would assert that as a fundamental premise with which they begin without justification, without by beginning with a conclusion that it's not valid because God doesn't exist. So it can exist as some kind of social club or some such thing, but they would have to affirm that it is fundamentally invalid because God doesn't exist, and therefore the rest of it would fall like domino. But there could still be millions of Christians. It would just be the point that, well, those millions of Christians are believing in something that isn't true. So that's the distinction. Christianity, as the worldview, the philosophy, the view, the religion, the concept, or whatever terms we want to throw at it, versus the people who adhere to that. Same with atheism. Atheists, my point is that they're adhering to a concept that's invalid. That's the categorical distinction between the concept and the people who hold to it. There may be an increase in people who hold to it. That tells us nothing, literally nothing, about whether the concept is true or not, or whether it matters on atheism. Again, what does it matter? So if everything you laid out in your chart is true, I don't see what it has to do with anything whatsoever, except that we're counting heads, and then it doesn't matter still, because again, on atheism there is no universal imperative to adhere to truth. There's nothing there. So it's irrelevant. If 99% of the planet is atheist, that tells us absolutely nothing. And either direction that we take it, it's meaningless. It's just counting heads.
Well, if 99% were atheists, you could not reasonably say atheism is dead. You might say it's wrong. Oh, no, let me finish now. You might say it's wrong, but it's not dead. I also think that you've strawmanned atheism. Atheism can simply be, I have no sufficient reason to believe there's a God, so I don't believe it. That's my position. I have no sufficient reason to assume a God exists, so I don't believe in a God any more than I believe in the tooth fairy. I don't take it further than that because I can't.
Okay,
So let me just get clarification, because in the audience people are noting about definitions and just saying that we really have to have. Is there like, for example, with Christianity, our core concept is that Jesus resurrected from the dead, and to be a Christian really requires belief in that concept, or you really can't follow Christ. So, in what is the core uniting concept for atheists?
There isn't one. There is not one. Atheists are as different from each other as can be. All we share is we have no reason to believe there is a God. Now, beyond that, I mean, there are all kinds of atheists I strongly disagree with. And for me, atheism or theism isn't the important dividing line anyway. My approach is philosophical, and while I'm an atheist, I don't consider myself an atheistic philosopher, nor am I an anti-apologetic. It's not the most important issue. And for atheists, there isn't a common core. I'm very different from a communist. I'm very different from an existentialist. We don't have necessarily common beliefs. And I think it's a projection of Christianity onto atheism to believe there has to be a common core when there just simply isn't one.
So Ken, is there a problem to you if there's no common core that can unite in some way, some common belief that all atheists share? Is that problematic, or is that not problematic?
Well, we're hearing that there is, and we're hearing that there isn't, because obviously he's telling us that there's a basic bottom line definition. All atheists fit into that category. And then, yeah, there's various denominations and sects.
No, there really aren't. We don't believe in a God. Do you believe in the tooth fairy?
That's a category error.
No. It's not a category error. It is a matter. It's the same epistemology. Do you believe in the tooth fairy?
Well,
Yes or
no,
no?
it's not the same
Do you
epistemology.
do you
Compare
believe in the
a
tooth fairy?
philosophically necessary being to,
Your evasion of the question suggests that it isn't an error.
well, that's a
Ca-
subjective interpretation.
can you just answer the question? Do you believe in a tooth fairy?
No.
So you have the same worldview as all of us who don't believe in a tooth fairy.
I have a component of my worldview that touches upon that issue, yes.
Okay. And so what do you and I have in common other than we don't believe in a tooth fairy?
Well, that's a good question. I'm trying to figure that out.
Well, then maybe it's not, maybe lacking a belief in something doesn't determine what you do believe.
So, Jeff, do you lack a belief in God, or do you believe God does not exist? Because it's the same thing with the tooth fairy. I lack the belief in a tooth fairy, and I also believe that the tooth fairy does not exist.
It's but for me personally, I don't believe a God exists. For the same reason that I don't believe in a tooth fairy. Exactly for the same reasons.
Okay, so I mean, this is an epistemic issue, and so I was curious. So, for instance, you said that I was strawmanning, but I can't even imagine what kind of meaning that would have to an atheist. So, okay, let's just say that look, yes, I admit I was strawmanning. What does it matter if a temporarily and accidentally existing ape was strawmanning a position? What does that
Right
have to do
there,
with anything?
right there, you just did a straw man. How do you know I believe that?
Well, because by definition, like I was saying at the very opening, your atheism would carry certain baggage with it, so that you cannot affirm that God created us. You can't do it if you want to maintain your central dogma.
I don't maintain a central dogma. I have concluded
You just,
that a God did not create us on
well,
a
there you go.
basis. Well, I'm sorry. I
Go
went
ahead.
from
Go
believing a
ahead.
God created us to studying the issue and concluding a God didn't create us. That doesn't take me to any other dogma than I don't believe a God created us. I have no reason to believe that.
Then let's
Yeah,
start from that.
wait, can we I hate to interrupt, but Craig put up something that I think is important. Atheists are either materialists, empiricists, or naturalists, and cling closely to an almost logical positivism. Craig, you know me better than that. You know me better than that. I don't fit any of those categories.
You don't fit the materialistic category.
I'm a
You,
physicalist. I'm not a materialist, and I'm not a reductive physicalist. And
oh
it's
boy. Okay, I'm not interested in splitting hairs to the
well,
nano level.
it's
So
not a
let's just
splitting
continue the
hair. It's a
discussion. I mean,
crucial difference.
seriously.
No, it's a crucial difference. And,
So,
and that ignoring that difference is a part of the straw manning.
well, let me ask you this. So,
Well, let me. We cut off halfway to get into that. So I was saying, fine. Let's start at that. Let's start at the point where you said you don't believe we were created because of the reasons you gave for it. So that's fine. Let's start there.
Mhm.
So what does it matter if I strawman?
Say it again.
What does it matter if I did strawman?
What it matters is the points that you're trying to make from that straw man are invalid. That's what it matters.
What does it matter if I'm making invalid points?
Are you trying to lead to that there is no truth and nothing matters? Because I don't believe that. That I think you're leading to another straw man.
Which wouldn't matter. But no, I already affirmed that in an atheist universe, there would be truth, but there would be no universal imperative to adhere to it.
There
Nor,
isn't anyway.
nor,
What makes you think there is one?
nor a premise upon which to condemn those who
No,
violate.
there you are straw manning again. Um, I
Okay,
just
then
want
let's back up because if
I,
you keep
just
saying
a
I'm
second.
strawmanning, I need to know what would be wrong with it.
I will in just a second. Craig, I am an exception to that, and I have a very different underlying philosophy, but I'm far from the only one. Now, yeah, most atheists are in fact logical positivists, reductionists, but then so are most Christians in their daily life. That's just the general tenor of modern culture that I reject. Okay, now to your question, Ken, what difference does it? How do I? How can I judge if something is moral or not? Is that what you're trying to ask? What
No,
is
no,
it you're
no.
trying to ask?
Why you implied that it is wrong to straw man?
Mm-hmm.
What is your justification for that, if that is what you were implying?
Because it blocks off the proper questions toward understanding reality.
Okay, but I'm not aware of any premise upon which to make a universal imperative out of understanding reality on atheism.
Why would there be a universal imperative? Where do you ground that in?
There wouldn't. That's the
No,
problem.
but why would there actually be one in reality? What do you ground that in? That's it. You seem to have the supposition that there is a universal imperative toward truth, or what do you ground that in? How would that work?
Well, that's the question I'm asking you.
Well, I'm saying there isn't one. So why do
Okay,
you ask the
so
question?
let's pause there a second. So let's affirm that I was correct in what I said earlier, is that atheism and results in absolute subjectivism.
No, again, that's the fallacy of bifurcation right there. There are other possibilities.
So this is just another claim to a fallacy, and I'm still trying to understand what's wrong with committing fallacies on your worldview, on your
Because
whatever you want to call it.
because they block off the proper questions.
Okay, but see, this will become a bottomless pit of what's wrong with that, what's wrong with that, what's wrong with that, because you're importing a pseudo-authoritative statement about how there are important questions and
I
that
haven't grounded it yet.
There's some kind of universal imperative that those questions must be asked and answered.
There's not a universal imperative,
Exactly.
but there is, from our viewpoint, an important reason to do it. But it's not a universal imperative. I will ground that in a minute. But first, I want to go back to my question to you. Do you believe there is a universal imperative? And if so, why? In what is that grounded? How do you ground that belief?
But we're not there yet. I'm just still asking.
Well,
okay,
we're not to mine yet either. So
that's fine. Let me review. So I asked you about it seemed that you were implying a universal imperative. You're saying no, you weren't. It's just subjective. It's
no, I didn't say you're putting words in my mouth again. I didn't say it's just subjective, but there's not a universal imperative. I will get to that. I will explain it after you explain why you think there is.
Okay, I mean I'll do that, but I think it's an oddity that I ask you a question and you say I'll answer it down the line.
Because we have to look at your presupposition first.
That's what I'm trying to do.
Why would I accept that there even is a universal imperative? Why would I accept that? Why is that a premise?
Okay, I mean, I'll answer that, even though I didn't state any such thing. I'm just saying that you seem to be implying that. It seemed to be your hidden assumption. Because if not, you're just telling us Jeffrey's emotive, subjective, personal preference.
Nope, I'm not doing that either.
I am asking you why. So that's fine.
That's again a straw man, and I will get to why that's a straw man after we decide.
I don't want to know why it's a straw man. I want to know what's wrong with straw man. And when we haven't even gotten that,
I will explain exactly why that's a straw man. But first, we need to finish with the reality of a universal imperative.
Okay.
Otherwise, we're arguing over nothing. Are we arguing over nothing?
I would say on your worldview, yes, absolutely. We're arguing.
Okay, tell me on your worldview. I don't have a worldview, but on your worldview, what is it?
Let me just interject here because I want to drill down on this point just a little bit. So the moral imperative or the idea is, do we have objective
universal imperative?
Universal. Okay, so I say, do we have objective, universal moral imperatives to do what's right, to be benevolent, to be loving, to tell the truth? Do we have that?
To say we don't have objective moral reasons to do that is not the same as saying we don't have reasons not to do that. I'm saying we don't. There is no objective morality, but there is a morality.
So
In academia, just to point this out, they define objective as stance independent. So it doesn't depend on what my stance is on whether or not Johnny, like for example, algebra, the algebra book has algebra in it. It doesn't matter whether or not Johnny understands algebra as to whether algebra is true. It's kind of the same idea is the moral obligations to do what's right. It doesn't matter whether people can grasp those moral obligations to say that the moral obligations aren't there. So that's all I'm saying.
And that's totally irrelevant to my issue, to my stance. I'm saying there is no objective moral law, which is not to say there is not a morality. And I will explain that. I've explained it to you, SJ, probably 20 times now, but we will do it again today. So Ken, tell me where this objective moral imperative comes from.
Jeff, can you say it I don't know if it's my computer, but you're kind of going in and out. Can you repeat that?
I was afraid of that because I'm far away from my router because I'm trying to stay away from the dog.
Well, there's times that you break up for me, but SJ seems to hear you. But now SJ couldn't, but I could perfectly. So
well, then it's in StreamYard.
A Bermuda triangle between the three of us.
StreamYard gets glitchy like that. It's a StreamYard issue, not one that any of us can do anything about.
So let me just jump to the answer you were asking about,
yes.
And then we'll get to all these things that you claim you're going to get to.
I will. No, I will. And I have many times.
Okay, so on the Christian view, well, it's the same basic view that was the premise for the establishment of the scientific method, which is that a rational creator created a rational creation and populated it with rational beings who could therefore rationally discern it. And so since the universe, ergo reality, therefore truth, therefore facts, do not exist accidentally, but are existing purposefully. And we were created in order to be able to discern that real, truthful, factual existence. Then we have a universal imperative by the fact that we were created to exist in it and in the words of scripture to know truth, to ascertain facts, to gain wisdom. I mean, the Bible is literally saturated with statements such as those, that we are to know the truth and the truth shall set us free. So that therefore that's a universal imperative, which, by the way, just in case somebody doesn't know, universal in this case just means everywhere, everything, right? Universal all across the board. And then imperative is a must do. It's a thing that you have to do. Universal imperative, it's for all people in all times, in all places, something that they must.
All you've done is restate your position, but not why I should believe it.
Well, but you asked me about my position.
Yes,
that's what I was answering. The explanation of my position.
Your position, and if you can't ground your position, there's nothing to argue about because there's nothing there. Why would I believe that?
But
because
see, that's
the Bible
interesting.
says so doesn't say anything to me.
But let's not jump ahead of ourselves. So, for instance, you spoke of that you don't have reasons to believe in God, and I still don't understand where you get the concept that you're supposed to base your beliefs on reasons, and that you should only believe in things for which you have reasons to believe in them. From your
let's change reason to
ground. That's a jump to a conclusion. You're beginning at the end.
No. You're jumping to the conclusion that it exists, and then starting from that conclusion. I'm saying I don't have the ground. I'm asking you the ground. Why should I believe it? Why should I believe that?
But see, prior to that is your justification for laying that out as if it's some sort of universal imperative that I must.
No, I did not. Again, you're strawmanning. I did not do that. All I'm asking for is why do we start with the premise that that the universe is rational, the Bible is true, and your God it created it. Why do we start with that? Why on what grounds would I accept that?
Okay, I don't know who we is. Obviously, you don't. So I do, and you asked me for my view, and that's
No,
something.
no, no. I know your view. I know your view. I'm asking for the ground of that view. Why would I believe that? Why should I? Why
Well,
do you believe it?
that's a good question, and it's immensely complicated because I
Well,
certainly didn't start even anywhere near that conclusion. So
what are
I, I would
what
have
are
to
the
tell you like
grounds for
a
that belief?
almost 30-year long story. But
Well, that gives me no reason to accept what you're saying. None at all.
and that's what I'm asking. Why do you insert artificially this concept that you must have a reason that you personally accept in order to hold to a view? That's just an artificial construct right there. It's just
So is
something.
it an artificial construct that the tooth fairy doesn't exist?
Okay, that's a
No, no, it's not a category error. It's the same exact type of example.
no,
We
no,
have
no, no.
not switched categories.
Because the issue
Why?
is
I
that
have
you are
grounds. I
laying
have
out
grounds for not
you're
accepting
laying
the
out
tooth
these
fairy.
pseudo standards, but that's all they are.
No, they're not. If you can't give me grounds for your position, it's nothing but empty metaphysical assertion,
There's a
which I'm
dogma right
perfectly
there.
justified to reject.
Okay,
That's a
let's
dogma
just
right there.
let's
That
break for a
entire
second here.
statement is a mere assertion with which you begin as a conclusion. You just jump to it.
I'm not making an assertion yet. I'm asking you to give me the grounds for your assertion.
Let me just break up for a second. Let me just break you guys. Let's each take, say, 3 minutes. Just do 3 minutes each of just uninterrupted time on explaining your point, so we make sure that everybody is able to articulate exactly what
Sure.
you want to say. So whichever one wants to start.
Ken, go ahead.
I mean, for me, these issues are immensely complicated because human beings are immensely complicated. So if you were to ask me something like, what happened the night that you accepted that Jesus is your Messiah? Oh, yeah, I would hardly know where to start because it was an emotional experience, it was a spiritual experience, it was an intellectual experience, it was a logical experience. It was like a perfect storm of everything, which makes us human beings what we are. The mind, the emotions, the everything. It was so involved that to me, I understand that some people have pithy one-liners that they can throw out about why I believe this and that. For me, it's immensely complicated. That's who I am. That's what we are. And so it would be in which direction do we want to take it? So, it's for me, there's a lot of issues wrapped up in it, and they're immensely complex because of that. So I could say, for instance, pondering the world the world is there a worldview that explains to us how humanity can exhibit beautiful acts of love and fellowship and horrendously terrible acts of cruelty and hatred and violence? And it no longer worked for me to say, well, it just happens to have happened. And so then it doesn't matter because it's all subjective. And is there something beyond that? And through the course of a very long time of serious thought and investigation, it seemed to me there must be an ultimate redeemer. And if there isn't, then yeah, it's just the brute fact that it doesn't matter in the end. It doesn't matter that my people went through millennia worth of oppression. It's just okay. It's just something that some apes did to other apes. It ultimately doesn't matter. So when I recognize in myself that there's something wrong, and I recognize in myself that forgiving myself is just a sham, and that when I seek forgiveness of others, it builds relationship, and that I couldn't possibly ask for forgiveness to thousands of people I've wronged throughout my life, some of whom live in other countries and I couldn't possibly find, some of whom have died, then it makes sense to me that one of the main lessons I learned just by becoming a dad is like if somebody bumps into your child, they don't look at the child and say, I'm sorry. The first thing they do is look around for the parent and they say, oh, I'm sorry. You know, so we recognize that there's something greater and something beyond, so that when I can't restore relationships because I can't get forgiveness, then there's an ultimate forgiver. And I don't know, those are just some of the things that come off the top of my head. Because again, my way of thinking is I'm going in like a shotgun, 1,000 directions. So which one is going to be of any relevance to these pseudo standards that you're beginning with as a person? I'm not sure.
Okay, Jeff, you want to get your 3 minutes?
Sure. I think that is a perfect example of why atheism is not only not dead, but thriving and growing. That is the sort of answer that will convince nobody who is not already a Christian, with perhaps a few exceptions, because he gave me no reason to believe it. He told me about his interpretations of his experience, but they're not interpretations that I recognize in my experience. I believe in morality. I believe in trying to find the truth, and I don't need a God to base that on. There's just what he described was his personal interpretation, all subjective, which is fine, but I don't have any reason at all to believe it. It's not something that I meet in experience. God never shows himself in experience. I don't have any reason to believe there is one. I have no reason to believe that the universe is ordered. Tell me the rationality and order of quantum reality. There isn't any. Particles and antiparticles pop in and out of existence out of absolutely nothing continuously. It's the way the world works. It's a naive view of what the universe is, and it's some very naive metaphysics. We can approach meaning without a God. We can approach morality without inventing non-existent moral law. And I say this just in connection to the topic of this conversation, which is atheism dead? No. As Vos showed, the more educated, the more economically secure, the freer we are, the less need for any sort of theism, because it doesn't really explain anything. It's groundless. I have no reason to accept it. I didn't need all 3 minutes.
It's okay. We're not as uptight as timing ourselves, are we, Jay?
No, I didn't know. How much longer do you guys, because I can probably go till about 20 more minutes or so. Does that seem pretty?
I mean, that'll work.
Yeah,
Okay.
I don't even know how much more there is to discuss. I'll leave it up to you. I haven't had breakfast yet, though.
I mean, I wouldn't mind kind of reversing through all of that really quick.
Sure, absolutely.
So see, this is why I referred to sociology earlier, because when you use the word more educated, I have no idea what that means. And when you say freer, I have no idea what that means, because
Well, we can talk about that.
it might mean more educated, might mean being indoctrinated into a certain kind of worldview, which in secularized countries or religious countries that have secular educational systems would be being trained in materialism. I mean, so again, I don't know what that would mean. So being freer could mean the freedom to commit unethical acts out in the open and proudly. So again, it would be a case-by-case cultural issue down the line as to figuring out what that means in any given country.
Well, let's look at Norway, 78% atheists. Do you think they're overrun with crime and immorality?
Well, I would say they were not established as an atheist country. I think they pulled a Dillahunty, which is to take Christian ethics, just remove God, and keep that structure. But whatever. I mean, my
The Greeks
interest isn't
had
to
well thought
discuss
out
a
ethics
foreign country
before.
about which I don't know very much. My only point was, let's be careful when we hear things like that. That don't just
Well,
make an assumption about what those words mean. This is why sociologists specialize in understanding exactly what is meant when these
let's also
names.
be careful in not assuming that freer means to commit any crime you want, which it certainly doesn't, nor that educated means indoctrination, which it most often isn't. It used to be. It's not so much anymore. By educated, I mean literate in the sciences, in philosophy, in the issues of the day. That's educated. Free means to be able to, I look at it as freedom of thought, freedom of speech, freedom to pursue happiness in your own way to the extent that it does not
Objective.
interfere with somebody else's freedom.
Why not?
Why not?
Why would yeah? Why
Because
would that matter?
because we have decided as a culture that it's in our interest, our mutual interest, to agree not to do so.
Okay, so then it's the cultural zeitgeist that rules the day.
It always is. Always is.
Exactly, it's pure subjectivism.
No,
That
it's
can
not
say
pure
it all along.
subjectivism. Again, you've strawmanned. I didn't say
It doesn't
anything
matter
that
on your
necessarily implies that. I didn't say anything that necessarily implies pure
So
subjectivism.
when you say we, I'm a I don't know who we is. We have decided.
I'll since I'm half Norwegian, I'll say the we is the 78% of us Norwegians.
So 75% of Norwegians are somehow promulgating the authoritative standard for all of humanity to hold to. If I
I don't
don't
think
understand.
they're doing any standards at all. But I'm talking about
Exactly.
Western culture where we do live, and we do as a culture decide those things. Our country here was founded on the individual right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's classical liberalism, which has pretty much spread throughout the West and parts of the East also. That's our culture. Those are what we have decided as a culture best promote the general happiness. Yes,
So
we do
then,
that as a culture.
so then when we encounter a different culture who has the exact opposite um, beliefs and practices, we can only say, well, that was their choice. We
I
have
would
our
say
choice.
that's a culture I'm not going to live in.
Yeah, because you have an emotive, subjective, personal preference
I'm
for
not
it.
worried
Exactly.
about other cultures. Other
Right.
cultures
But
worry
see,
about
you're
themselves.
right. So the point is, you cannot condemn them. You can just say that I personally don't like it. You can't say they're doing anything wrong.
Well, no, again, you've taken it a step too far. But we're heading in that direction. But you've gone further than you can rightly go. We have, all of us, an innate sense of morality. We can talk about where it comes from and not reach an end, but we have
So,
one.
so,
Let
so
me
there's no
finish.
objective
Please let me
morality, but
finish.
we
I let
all
you
have an
finish.
innate moral nature.
Please let me finish. We have an innate sense of morality, the same that we have an innate sense of reason. Now, the thing is, the morality is a subjective sense, but it's not subjective, does not mean arbitrary. We all feel revulsion if somebody tears a baby apart. It's innate. Okay. It's a
What?
part of us.
Whoa,
No,
whoa, whoa.
let me finish. I let you
Yeah.
finish. I
No,
let you go.
okay, go on.
You're going to let me go. So yes, if there's a culture that, for example, stones homosexuals and heretics, I'm going to say that disgusts me. It offends my sense of morality. It's not an objective law. It's something we're born with and that refines over time. The morality of Deuteronomy, most of us now find repugnant. It disgusts us because the sense of morality has refined. Now, there are some who still cling to it and find us, those of the majority of the West that finds that repugnant. They find us to be the immoral. Well, we're going to have a difference in interpretation.
Well said. It's all, everybody has their own opinion, and may the fittest win.
But it's not an arbitrary opinion. It's based on a common sensibility.
Okay, so that's a good point.
Over time.
So that's a good point at which to ask this question, because you refer to an innate sense, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Whence comes that innate sense?
Well, that's a very difficult question, but it's an important question, and I'm going to answer it the best I can. But we don't know origins of anything in the bigger sense. It can, if we were to think reductively, which I do reluctantly at times, it can be explained through evolution. Okay. But if we're to think non-reductively, that's where the interesting question is. And at this point remains a question. Where does our essence come from? We're part of the universe. We share the same essence, and that's all we can move from. If we judge something in a moral judgment, it comes from our essence. Where does that essence come from? That's the question that 2,500 years of metaphysics has prevented us from asking. It's time that we explore that question.
So let me just say this. I will never blame anybody for not having the pithy answer to an immensely complicated ancient question. So I appreciate the qualifying terms you used. And I'm not being sarcastic. I totally get it. But my point is the point I made at the very beginning. All indications of the baggage that is being carried by your view is that the innate sense is just an accidental byproduct. And there's no universal imperative to adhere.
Explicitly denied that. I just explicitly said, I don't know if it's an accident. I don't know what it is. Nor do you, nor does anybody who ever lived.
Okay, then let me rephrase it. One of the options you gave as a possibility was atheistic evolution. So that would fit into what I was saying. But let's drop that then. You don't know where it comes from, but you're implying that it's a used and universal imperative that all humans adhere to it. Or not.
No, it's not an imperative.
Exactly.
An imperative means a
pure
law.
subjectivism. That's going to be my point all along.
No, we don't have moral law. We have a sensible direction toward it that we refine, over time, and we define culturally. But it's off of a common basis. It's not a law. You cannot make a moral law. Kant did that and failed terribly. It doesn't work.
Okay. FYI, every single law there's ever been in human cultures throughout the millennia have been moral laws by definition. But
human made moral laws, not naturally standing objective outside of us laws. That's a very different thing.
Yeah, and I don't want to open that can of worms. I would love to, but there's no way we're going to finish that up in 10 minutes. But so my point is that you keep, in a roundabout way, you keep on affirming what I'm saying,
I don't. You keep bringing me back to trying to put those words in my mouth after I have explicitly said something different.
So in this case, my point was that you're ultimately saying we have an innate sense. We don't know where it comes from, but and I don't know what word you want to use. We should adhere to it. What kind of word do you want to use?
It defines our shoulds. It gives us direction toward the should, and gets refined over time. We now think we probably should not stone to death heretics. Okay. So but that's a should that used to exist that doesn't exist anymore.
So for all intents and purposes, this uncaused first cause of innate sense is the central dogma.
It's not a dogma. A dogma is specific laws, systems derived from the sense. But itself is not a dogma. It's a direction. It's a feel in the gut. We don't, when we make a moral judgment, we don't put it through a syllogism. We don't say, well, does it accord with or break this law? We don't say that. We feel it in our gut. It's a sensation.
Okay, what we feel in our guts is absolutely subjective. I mean, we keep getting back to the same point.
But
We don't,
you try to equate subjective with arbitrary, and it's not arbitrary.
well, but for all you know, it is,
No,
because
it's
for all
not
you know,
arbitrary.
it might very well be though,
But
right?
no. Let's step back to basics. To be arbitrary, it would mean that we could willfully have some other basis for that sensibility. We don't. We feel that, and it's not it's not something weak. If we see a baby being tortured, we don't have the arbitrary choice of not being offended. It's going to hit you in the gut.
I
It's
I
not
beg to
arbitrary.
differ.
Well, let me ask you this. Here's,
We
since
have
we're getting down to the
multi-billion
Yes,
dollar
Jay.
since we're getting
business
down to the
premised
end.
on the fact of brutalizing babies, and people celebrate it and vote in favor of it all the time.
And we
It's true
now
with abortion.
no, that's a whole different issue. Let's not conflate that issue with what I'm talking about.
That is
But
what
wait,
you
let me
want.
just, I got one idea here for the end.
Yeah.
So how about if we have each of you try to steel man the other person's position on what we've just been talking about?
I don't
No?
other
Okay.
people's position.
Do you want to each present your, like a just summary of what you
Oh,
think?
that's a good idea.
Baby. About it, we can agree.
We've agreed on some things. And I'll be honest with you. The most boring thing in the world is talking to people that you agree with. I tend not to do that because I already know what I think. I much more enjoy conversations with people I disagree with. And I've enjoyed this conversation. I'll be
I
honest.
was just going to say that. Yeah, it's been a good conversation. Obviously frustrating because I know we both want to go down the rabbit trails in immense depth, and that's just impossible. But you know, we do what we can.
There's future opportunities to do that, Ken. Plenty.
All right, SJ, we're seeing what you want to do in this last few minutes because we denied your requests.
So no, I
said
didn't.
No, SJ.
You said no to the steel man. That's fine. So I maybe just
also-
summarize what
Quickly,
you
I
think
need
the audience might have missed about your arguments. So if the audience, there's something you weren't able to say, maybe each take a few minutes to summarize what you want them to hear.
Go ahead, Ken.
Well, since I started, why don't you go first in finishing?
That's perfectly fine. I'm just going to take it back to the question of, is atheism dead? Demographically, obviously, just the opposite. Philosophically, epistemologically, it's the way forward because there is no ground for theism. It's simply a metaphysical assertion that does not accord, as time goes on, it accords less and less with the reality that we discover. The world is not rational. It's fundamentally irrational, timeless, and spaceless. There is no need. The whole question of a beginning is, Kant showed 240 years ago that the question itself is ridiculous. It's derived from transcendental illusion, and he shows that in the first antinomy in the Critique of Pure Reason. They're just it posits the wrong questions and then gives ungrounded answers to it. So is atheism dead? No, it is the way forward, and both intellectually, spiritually, because there is a spirituality that is much deeper without theism, and demographically. Ken?
So now I've personally had discussions with thousands of atheists and who claim all sorts of things. I mean, Jeffrey told us, yeah, atheists have their own views on everything. And so one of the challenges is when you're dealing with any individual atheist is try to understand what they individually or saying enough to interact with it without straw manning. I mean, I still don't know what's wrong with that, but that's okay. I'm just saying that that's part of where that comes from, is when every single atheist I have a discussion with tries to tell me that they are the authority on atheism and what atheism means, then I have to kind of adjust. So now I had to adjust to Jeffrey. Now, back to the fundamental question: is atheism dead? We saw that part of the answer depends on how you define atheism. So from the definition I've gotten from the thousands of atheists, if I need to boil them down or maybe go with the majority, then or maybe let's sidestep that. From Jeffrey's view that there is no God, then by definition, all else that follows is whatever word we want to use that's going to be pleasing to the individual for subjective. And so that's why, for example, I wrote a book about atheism and evolution and some of the world wars called From Zeitgeist to Poltergeist. Because when we're going with this, we have decided, then we saw what happened. And another culture decides otherwise. We can only say that we have an emotively subjective personal preference. Against that, we can't actually justify wholesale condemnation of it. The difference is that one is on the level of a my dear diary entry. Today I feel. So yeah, my feelings about what they're doing is that I feel this way. But that doesn't tell me anything about the ontological reality of what they're doing. It just tells me something about my subjective epistemology, how I feel about what they're doing. I can't actually condemn those actions. I can just say that the majority of the group to which I belong, we have decided that we don't like that. And so on a view where the universe was not created, was not designed, as I began with, then again, by definition, what follows is that we can adhere to reality or we can reject it. I mean, we can adhere to fantasies or we can reject them. It's totally up to you. So when we hear that there's no grounds, well, we still haven't heard why a ground is some sort of necessity. And when we're hearing about coming to better understand reality, again, why should we? What is the imperative to better understand accidental byproduct of an accident? There is no universal imperative to adhere to such a byproduct. So again, there could be a tremendous increase in the number of atheists, and that would tell us absolutely zero about whether their views are correct or not. So therefore, this isn't about quantity, it's about quality. Is the view of atheism true or not, accurate or not, is a whole different issue than counting how many atheist heads there are in the world currently, or in all of it. That's why atheism is dead, because as a concept, as a view, as a whatever on earth we're going to term it, it fails before it even begins, because it's just a subjective view of accidental reality. I mean, it's all the things I've mentioned already. So it itself is dead as a concept, and it corrupts everything which it touches, and regardless in how many people opt for it for reasons that's like sociologists and others can iron out. So
Well, thank you. I really appreciate both of you coming in here today, and I enjoyed the conversation. I think it was fruitful. I think there was probably some learning going on in the audience, and everybody enjoying it. And so I want to say I appreciate that. And I also just wanted to close with, if you wanted to share what you're working on next, or I put in the description where people can find you on Twitter. But if you have other places you want people to go, I know you've got some books there, Ken. Jeff, if you got something you want to share, just let us know.
Yeah, I've got my blog there. I publish on quite a bit. I'll put that in the comments. It's too late for the gods.com. It's easy to remember. And again, thank you for having me back once again, SJ. I know we disagree on literally everything, But you've always been a fantastic host, and I thank you.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
And Ken, I've enjoyed the conversation. I look
Likewise.
forward. There's so much more to discuss.
Yes, sir. Of course.
Thanks.
So
gonna
as
go-
for me, yeah, I mean, if you put our Twitter page, that's fine with me. At the very top, you can see where I have a link to my major project, which is the books I write. I've published like 68 books, so there's plenty to choose from, including 3 that are about atheism. So if you poke around Amazon for those, you might enjoy that. And so that's my ongoing project, is also always to somehow find time to carve out to keep authoring books, because that's something I just really, really enjoy. I find it's very cathartic to pile into a tremendous amount of research and finally just get it out.
I agree. I've been working on a book of philosophy for the last 2 years. I don't talk about it because that's how I spend my days. And I hope to finish it sometime in the coming year. And at that point, I will talk about it. Bits and pieces of my philosophy are on the blog, but just bits and pieces. I'm not ready to make public what I'm writing right now. But that's how when I get up at 1, I walk the dog, I eat breakfast, and I start writing.
Well, that's good. Well, thank you everybody for coming in here. I just wanted to say I'm going to be back on Monday morning talking to a person from the channel Recon. His name's Eddie, and he's going to discuss how he came to Catholicism, came back to Catholicism. That's at 9 o'clock in the morning Eastern. And then on Wednesday, I've got 2 Seventh-day Adventists coming on my channel to discuss how they left Seventh-day Adventism and why. And so that's what we got going on. So I hear an echo in my, hopefully you guys aren't hearing that. Oh, crazy. Well, everybody, please like, subscribe if you like this kind of content. Do come back again. We can always try to rev this up again with the second debate next time. But just remember, whether you eat, drink, or whatever you do, do it all for the glory of God. Thank you so much.
Amen.
And so stick around for just a sec here. I'll end.